I am unashamed. What about you?
Welcome back to Unashamed. We, Maddie, our wonderful producer, had a big idea. So, since we just got here so fast, we decided to hold sign.
We did a podcast that seemed like 5 minutes.
To us. Now,
But it
to
was
you
an
listen,
hour.
it was really an hour, so just so you know. But we decided to hold you guys over for a little bit of this next podcast because we felt like we got back to the pivotal moment that we've been talking about, and that's the death of Jesus. So thank y'all for coming back for a few more minutes. Because, on our podcast, we just kind of, one discussion picks up from the next one. It's like, Phil, you and I may not talk for weeks,
right.
But then when we talk, it's like we picked up the last conversation.
Absolutely,
Because you have a relationship and friendship. And so in this, we're talking about Jesus predicting his death. And I had loosely mentioned it because I want to get into the meaning of names, that this really is a huge moment because when these Greeks, and these are, by the way, probably proselytized Greeks. In other words, they...
Well, explain that.
Well, so
Zach.
they were Gentiles, but they became Jews through a purification process. The only reason I think that is because they were there to celebrate Jewish holidays. But
Where is Zach, by the way? I called you Zach.
Zach is on vacation this week. He's on the beach somewhere.
So he'd be proud that you used the word
Proselytize. It's a hard word to say and spell, by the way.
Yeah.
So they became Jews, but they weren't born.
Right. A good
with
example
the
of
physical
a
heritage.
proselytized Jew is Rahab from Joshua 3. She was in Jericho, but she saved her whole family because she believed. Well, later she became part of the Jewish heritage because she was in the lineage of Jesus, in the physical part. So there's a lot of examples of that. So that's who these guys probably were.
So just like Al, the Gentiles are all grafted in like wild olives anyway.
Exactly, which is Romans 9, 10, 11. So this is a big moment because the Bible doesn't, John just mentions it in like two little verses in 20 through 22. He said there were some Greeks among those who went up to worship at the feast. This is John 12, 20. They came to Phillip, and we talked about the lover of horses, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee with a request. Sir, they said, we would like to see Jesus. Philip went to tell Andrew, which means manliness. Andrew and Philip in turn told Jesus. And it doesn't say anything else. And the whole thing we read last time and talked about was Jesus' response to that request. And it was interesting because the Bible, all through the Old Testament, there's these little glimpses that show us that the Gentiles are going to have the opportunity. Isaiah 56 is a great one to show the idea that the gospel has always been more than just for the Jewish people. I mean, it came through the Jewish nation, but it's for everybody. And aren't we glad it is? 2,000 years later, here we sit, as Gentiles, now in the kingdom of God because of these opportunities that were there. And so Jesus' response about the Son of Man came for everybody, not wanting anyone to perish. Peter said in 2 Peter 2 and 3. So the idea is it was for all of us. And this idea, he says the Son of Man must be lifted up, which again uses that same phraseology. And the people asked when he said that, they said, well, who is the Son of Man?
Yeah.
In other words, it's back to that same question.
Yep. Who is he?
Who is he? Who is the man?
Yep.
Now, we've talked about Jase's phrase before, must be lifted up. And, of course, we know he's talking about he was lifted up on a cross, which was, a public execution come up with by the Romans to be the worst possible death you could do. And it was really to shame someone as much as anything else. The idea was you don't want to wind up like one of these guys. You're nailed to a cross, which is basically death by asphyxiation.
Which a lot of religious people end at the cross, which is a mistake. You
Correct.
can't have the gospel without the resurrection.
Exactly.
And so it's weird that you mentioned that. So he references Isaiah in chapter 12 a couple times, and we can get into that at another podcast because I did a whole thing on Isaiah, but I did want to read this one. In Isaiah 52, in verse 13, he says, see, my servant will act wisely. And he uses Israel as a nation sometimes in Isaiah, referring to the nation of Israel.
Right.
Because they were under captivity. Starts off with Assyria, and Assyria was famous for brutality and, think warriors and all that, and also Babylon. So he's writing to them saying, I'm going to give you comfort, but he's also giving you this foreshadowing that Jesus would come and be what Israel should have been, as far as reflecting God's faithfulness and promise. But so you have that going on in Isaiah, which is why it's difficult to read. But I think this is fascinating because when it says, see my servant will act wisely, he will be raised and lifted up and highly exalted. Well, what does that sound like? Mm-hmm. I mean, how did Isaiah... So that's why the Bible's so fascinating. But just think about that statement. He'll be raised, lifted up. In this case, he has that raised and lifted up and highly exalted. I don't think you can take one without the other. So just remember in John 3, right before the most famous verse ever, for God so loved the world, remember the story about Moses lifting up the snake,
the bronze snake in the desert.
What does he say about himself? Just like Moses lifted that, I will be lifted up.
That's where he first gives us that little clue. But it's more than just the cross, even though that's one implication. Jase is right. The resurrection and then ascension, because he was raised up, because he literally left the planet.
Now you're back to that human in the presence of God and representing us. So just think 1 John 2, when we have one who speaks to the Father in our defense. Mm-hmm. You're like, well, what's he saying? Just the fact that he's there, a glorified human in the presence of God, in our defense. There's a way to make it in the presence of God forever.
And let's face it, Jase, why do we love Superman so much? Why do they keep making? They just made the 14th Superman in my lifetime. So
makes me nauseous.
Why do they keep doing it? You know why? Because he looks like a man, but he can fly.
Yeah.
Like he just
there you go.
He lifts up off the ground.
That's what the world. They're like, come watch the man for $14.
He's got a red cape, but he can fly.
Yeah,
he's not really from here.
Well, no, because you think of that, Jesus ascended bodily and sat down at the right hand of the Father.
Yeah, and a cloud hit him from their sight because they were looking up saying, it's a bird, it's a plane. Nope.
It's Jesus.
It's Jesus. He's at the right hand of the Father.
But see, hey, here's back to about, we could not look at God because we'd die. Okay. Well, Jesus came so that we could see God.
Have that relationship.
Okay, and now he's up there with the Father, and every time I mess up,
that's right.
Jesus just points to the Father and said, hey, put that on my tab.
Father, forgive them.
Look, I was reading that Isaiah 52, and you literally just quoted the next verse. I read the part where it says he will be raised and lifted up, and then verse 14 says, just as there were many who were appalled at him, his appearance was disfigured beyond that of any man. He was just beaten and tortured and put on a cross. So will he sprinkle many nations. There's your point about he wants everybody.
Yep.
So at the end of last year, I realized I had a little bit of a weight issue. So I made this declaration, because I'm always looking for something catchy, and I'm a preacher. So I was like, 60 by 60. Epic fail. You introduced me, thankfully, Zach, to a group called PhD Weight Loss. And Dr. Ashley Lucas is the founder of that. The program has taught me what to eat, when to eat, and also it has worked on my relationship with food to show me how I can lose weight for life. So here's a picture of me if you're looking at this on YouTube. And this is me at the beginning of the process. Here I am now, 66 pounds later, 29 weeks into this program. And you see I look a lot better. I feel better. My medications have been cut in half, high blood pressure meds. I'm fully expecting when I get to the end of my journey and start maintenance, I will be off of meds altogether. So I'm healthier. There's no gimmicks, there's no pills, there's no side effects, there's no shots and injections, which, so many diets have now. You're not eating rabbit food. I feel full because it's protein, healthy, it's low carb, and they provide 80% of my weekly food at no extra cost. It's worth your investment for your health, also for your long-term life. Join me on my weight loss journey. Schedule your one-on-one consultation today by calling 864-644-1900, or you can visit myphdweightloss.com. That's 864-644-1900 Tell them Al Robertson sent you.
And kings will shut their mouths because of him.
And that's
Don't
why-
ever, because look, if you're a king who can't die, you're going to be able to overthrow
That's why you're
every
king
other
of
king.
kings.
Yeah, but watch,
Yeah.
look, but this last verse of Isaiah 52, for what they were not told, they will see. And what they have not heard, they will understand.
The
And that's what
naysayers.
Jesus is saying. If you've seen me,
The
you've seen the Father.
naysayers. Yep.
So
And
isn't
the
it-
reason why, and we didn't even read this section leading into it, because there's the triumphal entry, which was him coming in on the donkey
Right.
as a king. But
Yeah.
remember,
But that's a good thing to read.
Yeah.
Zechariah 9:9 says that.
Exactly.
It's predicted, and he quotes that.
Right.
But think about what he's doing. The Son of Man, he's a king, but he's a servant king.
That's
So
right.
every time you read the Son of Man, what about it says the Son of Man didn't come to be served,
But to
but to
serve.
serve.
Yeah.
So that's the part they did. They thought, well, I thought he was going to whoop everybody.
Right.
And he's like, oh, I'm going to whoop everybody.
Yeah, don't worry.
If they don't trust in me. But I'm first displaying my love. And that's why I think the Bible gets tricky, because God does overthrow kingdoms who oppress people. Like the whole book of Revelation is about that, which we've documented.
but go back.
But no deed is loveless. It's all coming from God's love. And look, I want to read a verse before you comment.
Well, when you say, okay. but that's why you got the three. Faith, hope, and love.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
greatest of these is love.
Greatest one's love.
Exactly.
And faith and hope are pretty good.
Well,
That's right. You can't do
gotta-
without 'em.
You've got to have that.
You gotta have
okay.
faith.
And look, that faith in the Son of Man.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, look, Isaiah 6 is quoted in John 12.
Yep.
Well, have you read Isaiah 6 lately? I want to read a verse and make a point that's hard to make, but I think we've gone here, so I want to. So in Isaiah 6, and they're under, I think at this time, Assyrian captivity, and he says, in the year of this king, he died, I saw the Lord seated on a throne. So he sees another vision, which is not unlike Daniel's, or he sees the Lord seated on a throne, high and exalted, and the train of his robe filled the temple, which we've talked about all this temple language. He would become the temple in John 12. We would become the temple of God through his Spirit. But watch, above him were seraphs or seraphim, which are angels. They had 6 wings, and the wings covered their faces and their feet, and they were flying around, and they were singing, calling out to one another, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. And this next phrase is really baffling to people. The whole earth is full of his glory. Mm-hmm. And when I read that, I thought, people have a hard time with that. They think, because that causes questions. Well, how could the whole earth be filled with God's glory if there's so much evil and so much pain? But what I would suggest is that's what they were singing, and I know that to be true, and Isaiah wrote it down. So that's why I said, whatever happens, I know it's not a loveless act by God, because the whole earth is filled with his glory. And so then he goes on to say, I am ruined, woe to me, because it scared him when he saw this vision. He's like, well, who am I to be representing you? And for I am a man of unclean lips. Because when you get this vision of God and him being in the midst of his enemies and offering his love, well, it makes you feel pretty sinful. And, he's like, well, who am I? I have unclean lips. And my eyes have now seen the King, Lord Almighty. Because he was saying, I see him in a vision. And so then it goes on to say, he said, here I am, send me. And he said, go tell the people, because be ever hearing, but never understanding. Be ever seeing, but never perceiving. Make the heart of these people callous. Make their eyes dull. And it's all these difficult passages that he mentions in John 12. But the whole point was for them to realize that he was who he is, and this is just not how you viewed God.
Yeah.
Jesus had a new way of viewing God. He became a human, and they couldn't wrap their head around it. And so what that did was it caused some of the Jews to rebel, but that rebellion caused some of the Gentiles to say, hey, this is good news. God became a man, because they didn't have all the tradition and the heritage to keep them from seeing God becoming a man.
Well, when I was getting ready for this, I read somewhere, and I can't find it now because I went everywhere. It said, God talking, that I've glorified it and I will glorify it again.
Yeah, that was the voice of
John 12.
That was the voice of Yahweh speaking.
That's right after
thundering to Jesus.
Well, just read it. Just read it. Read it out, because I think he says
Well, because I was wondering, and when you say the glory of God, okay, I take that, the creation.
Well, here's what he said, Si. So he says in verse 28, he said, Father, glorify your name. So he says that right after he tells exactly what's going to happen. And he says that in response to him saying that he was troubled in his heart.
Yeah.
It's almost like he's giving himself the pep talk.
Yeah.
And then he said, Father, glorify your name. In other words,
Yeah.
I'm doing this because we're doing this.
Yeah.
Then the voice came from heaven, I have glorified it and will glorify it again. Meaning what? My name, because that's what he said, glorify your name. The crowd that was there heard it.
I thought it was thunder.
And said it had thundered.
Yeah.
Others said an angel had spoken to him. So in other words, they knew it was something supernatural, but they didn't quite know what it was.
That should make you pause and say, when God speaks something and you think it just thundered, you've missed it, which I think that is his point.
That is a point.
And he glorified him, but think of the other time that he spoke. Remember at his baptism when Jesus received the Spirit?
Right.
Well, he was glorified, just like we are.
Right.
I think we get off on this because we have this narrative that Zach talks about that I agree with, this now but not yet, because we're glorified. When you get the Spirit, well, you have passages like Ephesians 2 that says God seated you with him
in the heavenly realms.
At your conversion.
Yeah.
And people are like, well, I haven't officially been seated. Well, from God's perspective,
You are.
He just is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But from ours, we're like, oh, I have the Spirit. And Si, you're right. It is the creation, but Jesus is introducing a new creation.
Well, no, because I've told people that. I said, hey, look, when I go to heaven, I'm going to ask Jesus, hey, look, can I take about 2 years off?
Take
and go
2
the
years
rest,
off.
See the rest of your creation? I said, because, hey, we just think it's just...
Why not 2,000?
I think he's going to. I think he's going to.
I said, I got eternity
No, you're
to
on
do
the clock,
this.
Si. You're not
Can I
gonna be
make
able
a prophecy? I think he's going to say, hey, Si, think bigger. Think longer. Think bigger.
You don't need oxygen anymore. You can go right into the outer
you don't need it.
And I ain't don't need a plane.
No plane.
No gas,
You're going
none
to
of
fly.
that.
You're a
Yeah.
Superman, son.
Yeah.
So when I was looking over this, it's so exciting. And before we leave Isaiah, I want to just say 750 years before this took place, Isaiah is saying in 53, surely he took up our infirmities and carried our sorrows, yet we considered him stricken by God, smitten by him, and afflicted. He was pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. And so what we're seeing, and when Jesus is riding in on that donkey, this is fixing to take place.
Yeah.
Oh,
I
exactly.
mean, this is, and then I was thinking about the nard that Mary poured on his feet, and I thought, I started looking at that, and if you go back to the Song of Solomon, that perfume is talked about in there. It's like the finest of the finest, this perfume.
Very expensive.
Yeah.
Very expensive.
Yeah.
And then also, while Jesus was going through all the things he was going through, the torture, getting beat, and then even hanging on the cross, I wonder if he could smell that fragrance.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That Mary had poured on
Well,
him.
and he even
good
said
thought.
she had it for the day of my burial, but then she was
Yep.
doing it ahead of time because she recognized a moment
Yeah.
that was happening, which is why he loved her so much. You remember then he had that little spat with Judas about it, who was a follower of the evil one.
Yeah.
And so you see that picture clearly. And I do want to bring that up because of the discussion for the rest of this podcast, is that Jesus said, remember he said that they kept the plot is we're going to kill him because they're even rightly saying one man needs to die so that we don't all die. That's what they kept saying. Well, they didn't realize why they were saying that, but they were right. But you remember what Jesus said? No one takes my life.
No, see, that's what.
To me, that's the catalyst.
That's the catalyst.
That's why that Isaiah said we considered him like that. But
Yeah.
he clarifies that when he got here. He's like, God's not punishing me. I'm
Right.
giving my life.
That's,
Exactly.
no
for
one
you.
takes it.
No one takes it.
takes it.
I'm giving it.
This
freely.
is a gift that
Yeah,
I'm
you couldn't
freely
take it if
given.
you wanted to.
Right.
But you know
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
that means? Because I think the most important passage in this John 12 is when he says, after he hears the voice, and he says, now is time for judgment on this world. Now the prince of this world will be driven out. But when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all men to myself. Well, there's the love draw.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a draw of love that the same reason she poured out that perfume on him, she realized he came here to give his life for
No,
us.
because that's what I was trying to say when I said, okay, this is the Son of Man. Look at all the times and what he faced. Knowing he's fixed to die a horrible death, and he still does it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and everybody's got.
This is not the Son of God. This is the Son of Man that's fixed to do
Well,
this.
it is the Son of God, and
Yeah.
it is the
Yeah,
Son of
but I
Man.
mean,
but in his humanity,
Yeah.
he was filled
Yeah.
with sorrow.
And like
is your
Jase
point.
has said many times on our podcast before, it's counterintuitive to look at a situation and say a conquering king, the first thing they do is surrender their life.
No.
I mean,
Yeah.
you were a military guy.
Yeah.
Surrender is usually not the first thing we
Nope.
think of doing when we're in warfare.
Yep.
But in this particular warfare, when it came to sin, when it came to consequence, when it came to eternal life, we all have a fear of death. It's exactly what we had to have, a martyred Lord.
But that goes back to when I said I want military on you. Jesus' mission. His mission. That's what it was for.
Exactly.
For us.
It was the only way we could
Yeah.
survive.
It was the only way
Yeah.
we could come back to God.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and it
Okay.
defined love for us, Then you're getting back into those
Because-
passages in Revelation where it's like they didn't love their life to shrink back from death. But because really, if God's
Revelation
eternal,
12.
Well, that's why.
and resurrection is viewed as a narrative that is now.
Yeah.
It just is
Well,
when you read
I
it.
always tell everybody, I said, hey, look, a human being, a man, will not die for a lie. He's not going to do it. He ain't got it in him.
Not purposefully.
Not purposely.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And I said, and yet, hey, 11 out of the 12 did die, and they died. Paul was crucified upside down.
Peter, I
Peter.
think. Yeah.
Well, yeah, Peter.
Traditionally.
They all
Yeah.
caught it though, some way, side.
But
They cut
anyway,
off Paul's head. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I that's one of the prayers that I say. When I am really tested, Father and Son and Holy Spirit, give me the boldness
Yeah.
that if a guy puts a pistol in my head, 357 says, hey, you're going to deny Christ or I'm going to blow your head off. Waste your bullet, fool.
Well,
I said, because I got this to tell you. I know the man that raises dead men. Far away.
Well, and everybody had their own agenda. I mean, think about it. I mean, because the humans were like, okay, the Jews were like, let's get Jesus in here. Let's build up this physical kingdom, and we're fixing to whoop everybody, right? I mean, and even Judas was like, don't put the cologne, the perfume. Don't put that.
Canard.
Don't use that. Let me have that money. We'll do something else with it.
Yeah.
Which,
Well, he was being
mainly go in
selfish.
his pocket.
he's going to
yeah.
be more suicidal. I mean, come
Yeah.
on. No, but everybody had their agenda. But Jesus had his agenda too, and he wasn't going to turn back from that.
Well, this young man had done something with the kids when he was at the church. Yeah, White Ferry.
Jase?
Yeah, when he was teaching them. He asked them, close your eyes and then tell me, how do you picture God? What's your vision of him? And it's a good question because that's what problem the humans have. Okay, number one, we can't look at the Father because the light would be it'd kill us. So back to the mission, the Father gave Jesus, his son, the mission. Hey, go down there and hey, here's what here's the plan.
Yeah. Picture a Israelite from Nazareth who's a carpenter, just a young guy, That's some image that you should be getting that was representing the Father.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the vision.
Well,
I know. Or you got something?
No, let's go ahead. 'cause
Well,
we
I
gotta
was
wrap
gonna.
this.
I thought this was when Phillip, it triggered a thought that I think is just very profound. Why people can't see this, and everybody has their narrative. It's interesting that they want to kill Lazarus and they want to kill Jesus after this, but in verse 19 of chapter 12, the Pharisees said to one another, "This is getting us nowhere." But they make a statement that I think should really be pondered on. They said, "Look how the whole world has gone after him." Well, that is why he came.
Yeah.
It's like they see it but can't see it, and
They see it as a negative.
They're
and it's the
jealous.
best thing that ever happened.
Yeah.
and this is what we want.
Yeah.
So I think when you go through life just as a human being who claims to be surrendered to the King, you need the world coming after you in various ways, good, bad, and ugly, mad, glad, and sad.
Thank you guys for coming back on for another half of podcast. We're going to continue this discussion about persecution and martyrdom for the rest of the podcast. Thank y'all for being on.
Thank y'all for
And
having
that was
us.
an
Phillip
hour
inside.
and 20 minutes or more.
That's
Yeah.
right. And
It always
you're
goes-
ready to come back
Oh,
next
I
time.
think so. It's ready.
All right, we're going to take a break.
Yeah.
We'll come back. We'll talk some more about this. I don't know how to describe what just happened.
We're recovering over a podcast and a half with my uncle.
We had Uncle
who I
Si
love.
and Phillip on, but now we've brought some calmness and some integrity, and I don't know what all. We brought Todd Nettleton on. Todd, welcome to Unashamed.
Thanks so much. Good to be
Todd
with you.
is a guy you've heard us talk about before on the podcast because we've done a lot of ads for Voice of the Martyrs, Todd, in your book, When Faith is Forbidden, 40 Days on the Front Lines with Persecuted Christians. And so, first of all, just thank you and Voice of the Martyrs for partnering with our podcast, which has been a great blessing.
It's our pleasure. Thank
And you may be the only sponsor we've ever had, Maddie, you have to check me on this, that you are actually offering something to our listeners
For free.
for free, which I love.
Yeah.
That rarely
It
happens.
kind of reminds me of God's grace.
Well,
It's like,
we talk about the Voice of the Martyrs ministry to persecuted Christians in 70 plus countries. And yes, that is part of our ministry. But part of our ministry is to American Christians to tell the stories so that we can know what's happening with our family around the world and so we can be encouraged. When you read about someone who says, I would rather go to prison than deny Christ, the inevitable question in your own mind is, well, would I rather go to prison than deny Christ?
Exactly.
And so that forces us, it blesses us, it encourages us, but it forces us to ask some hard questions, like where am I at in terms of what would I give up for the gospel?
Well, when I first read your book, when we first got it to kind of prep ourselves for you guys being a sponsor on the podcast and a partner, I immediately always think of Revelation 12:11, which is one of my favorite passages, that says we overcome the evil one by the blood of the Lamb, the word of our testimony, and the fact that we don't love this life so much we would shrink back from anything, even death or prison, or there's other things too. And so it's always impacted me, and we've talked about this before, Todd, so I'm so glad you're here today, that the idea that we understand martyrdom because it started with our martyred King, Jesus, and we were just on the podcast with Si and Phillip before you got here, talking about how he said, no one takes my life, but I give it as a gift, for you. And it became his way then to introduce the divine to humanity was the giving of a life, which then transforms us and, of course, shows us eternal life. And so it really is just a continuation of that. And you're right. I think as Americans, we sometimes don't realize what's going on around the world. And you have been around the world in many places, which was the point of this book. But tell us a little bit, just so the audience can get to know you a little bit, because we had breakfast this morning, so you told me a little bit of your story. But you being a missionary's kid, kind of how that shaped you and all that. Tell a little bit about how that happened, how you came to Christ to begin with.
Yeah, so I grew up my early years in Southern California. My dad was a pastor there, and when I was 12 years old, my parents felt the call to go to Papua New Guinea as missionaries. And I had one brother at that time. I have another brother since who was born in Papua New Guinea, but we kind of had a family conference like you do. Oh, hey, we think God is calling us to Papua New Guinea.
Now, where exactly is Papua New Guinea? I don't even know where that is.
Just north of Australia. So it's in the South Pacific. And so they went around the family. Do you think we should go? And yes. And I was the no. I was like, nope, I'm getting ready to go into junior high. I can finally play sports at school. This is not a good time for me. Let's stay in California.
Middle school is the worst time for any kid to be disrupted.
Yes,
I have to say that. Yes.
So, but at the end of the day, and I said at the time, if this is what the Lord is calling us to do, let's go do that. And so we got on the plane, and like I say, I was not very excited about it.
So you're what, 12?
I was 12.
Okay.
And we went and spent 4 years in Papua New Guinea. And it was hard. It was very hard when we moved. It was very hard when we came back to reintegrate into American society at 16. But as I look back on that now at 55, I see all the seeds that God planted in my life during those 4 years. And, I wrote a book. Well, in Papua New Guinea, we didn't have a television for 4 years, and so I learned how to read for pleasure. Like that was my entertainment.
Yeah.
Well, if you want to be a writer, you better be a reader, and so that seed was planted there. I love getting on a plane and going someplace I've never been before, and figuring out, okay, what do you eat? What do you not eat? How do you find a bathroom? All those things. I love doing that. That's an adventure to me, and that seed was planted when we got on that plane and moved to Papua New Guinea.
So Papua New Guinea. It's very isolated, like kind of cut off from the world kind of place?
It was at that time. It is less so now.
Okay.
But it is. So Papua New Guinea is half of the island. The other half is West Papua now, and I think it's part of Indonesia. But Papua New Guinea, if I'm remembering correctly, has 700 languages.
Wow.
So literally you would go over the mountain range and there would be a new people group with a new language. And so there's lots of Bible translation.
So very tribal
setting.
Kind of jungle setting.
It's very jungly along the coast. It's kind of mountainous in the middle, but also tropical. I mean, rainy season, it rained every day, and the dry season, it rained every other day. So it was never
Did you learn what varmints to be afraid of?
We lived in a city. So a city of about 13,000 people, and my parents were the missionary kid hostel parents. So the kids whose parents were in the bush, they came and lived with us during the school year. So we had about 15 around our table most days.
That sounds a lot like our upbringing, Jase, out on the river. There were always a lot of people around our table, too.
So, but like I say, so many seeds that God planted during those 4 years. And again, I didn't want to go. I was not excited about it. But God used that to plant seeds that now are bearing fruit for the kingdom. And
you were 12-year-old Jonah, but you finally got swallowed up. and that loaded in the belly of that plane.
In the belly of the plane.
So were you introduced to the persecution there, or?
One of the books I read there was about a persecuted Christian, actually from the Soviet Union, from Russia.
Okay.
And I remember that story. The other thing that my dad did super well is he would read to us, my brother and I, he would read us stories before bed every night. It was story time. He would read a book. And some of those books were the stories of missionaries and martyrs. And Bruchko is one I remember very well, a book called Lords of the Earth by Don Richardson he read about Stanley Dale. And so from a very young age, it was heroic to me to be a missionary, to be a martyr.
Yeah.
And so that's another one of those seeds that the Lord was planting, and now we see the fruit of that. But yeah, and those heroes, and when I get a chance to talk to parents now, I encourage them, hey, your kids are going to have heroes, and some of them are going to be great basketball players or great football players, and that's fine. Make sure some of their heroes are gospel heroes, are people who sacrificed for the gospel, followed Christ wherever he called them. Make sure your kids think that is heroic, because that's going to impact them their whole lives.
Yeah.
Well, I remember when we were in school in the late 80s, Jase and I were in a school of preaching together, and Jase had come across Justin's Book of Martyrs, somehow, somewhere. And I had never heard of the book. And
we had to do chapel lessons.
Yeah.
And I was immature at that time of my life because we were so in the weeds of the Bible, but I was so thrilled with just the story of Jesus, and it just didn't seem thrilling. So I was trying to these people need to be more excited. And so I was
this is good news.
These people gave their life. I was looking at the end of their lives if we're going to be preachers, I want to be like these guys, which led to them all but John being martyred. And he had multiple, he probably looked like, Scarface. And
he had
endured being boiled in oil. I mean, just imagine what he looked like. And so that's how I discovered it, because I was I wanted to get the details.
And so we would drive back and forth, and so we would practice our chapel sermons on each other, to see how it works. And so he was laying that on me, and I'd never heard of it. But it talking about seed planting, it planted something in me, because Jase wound up going back to work for Duck Commander, and obviously our paths diverged, and I wound up in full-time ministry at the church. But I never forgot about that concept of martyrdom. And so one of our dear little sisters at our church that has since crossed over, she came to me one day with a VOM newsletter, Voice of the Martyrs, a little magazine, and she said, "Have you heard of this group?" And I said, "Boy, what is a VOM?" And she said, "Voice of the Martyrs." I said, "No." And so then I listened to some radio, and then we wound up even hosting a conference here years and years ago. Well, you and I talked about this morning. And so I was intrigued, and I thought, man, I didn't realize, like most American Christians, I didn't realize what's going on around the world. And so it really impacted me in a powerful way, and it's always reminded me to pray for my brothers and sisters. And we were talking on a recent podcast about Israel and Iran and the conflict that's recently been happening in our culture. And we talked about the idea of looking at countries in different ways because of the kingdom being there. And you and I talked about it quite a bit this morning. So you do a radio show as well.
Yep.
That's all across, which, how would folks find it? Is there just...
VOMradio.net is the website.
Go.
You can find a radio station. You can find a podcast stream. You can access it multiple ways.
So you were telling me this morning about just having a guest on. So tell us a little bit about that, because it really, to me, it's so, when you started telling me this morning, I thought, oh man, that's just what we were talking about on the podcast, was the idea about sometimes you look at countries as just the regime that controls a country, and you forget about the people that are there. So tell me about the one.
Well, fastest growing church in the world is in the Islamic Republic of Iran. So this is good news. Fastest growing church in the world.
Did you know that?
Islamic Republic of Iran.
But I contributed Lord put me in a situation where I got to speak to some underground churches via technology. When was that? A couple of years ago?
From Athens, man. I was telling you about
from Athens, and it was very exciting. But I just wanted to say before you finish your story, they told me, Larry Bowes, and he said, "No, you realize if you do this, you're probably going up on a bulletin board somewhere." and you were talking about planting seeds, but it made me think, Al. I did start working for Duck Commander, after the school, but I did take one trip to the Ukraine in the early, I guess it was 1991.
Right around 90, late 80s, early 90s.
And I was kind of like your experience. I didn't really want to go, but I was like, hey, the walls come down. These people need Jesus, so I went there, and we were having little groups every night, and it was a whole 3 weeks of handing out food. We got ways to handle.
You're trying to introduce small groups into a culture where groups were outlawed because of communism. We did the same thing in Romania, right?
Yeah.
So they were very nervous about meeting, even though now they were free.
It was, and that's why I'm getting to this punchline story. But we also played basketball at a gym. They only had 3 gyms in the whole country, and they thought we were, because I looked like LeBron James to them, because none of them could play. They just weren't very good. And we spoke at their English-speaking university, and we just shared Jesus. But they came to the class. It was full, standing room only every time, because they wanted to hear. They were learning English. Of course, then they realize if you're from Louisiana, that's not necessarily
It's
the
sorta
right way.
English.
Yeah. Anyway, that was kind of the ministry. But one night we were in a group, and so we're speaking through interpreters, and we had somebody show up that didn't like what we were doing. And he basically said, if you keep talking about this, you're going to wind up dead here. But my he said that, and I was like, no, what did he say? And when the interpreter said that, he basically said, he says, if you keep preaching Jesus, someone's going to kill you here. And I don't know, it's just like, it hit me like a ton of bricks. And I thought, well, do I believe this or not?
Yeah.
I mean, it was a really good question. And I said, well, you tell him we're ready. We can't die. And I kind of got chills even saying that then, because I thought, this is real. I mean, this is part of the equation for following Jesus. But I've always had an appreciation for people who go into those countries, because you can say, oh, well, nothing happened to you is good. But in the moment, I'm in a foreign country, and I'm being threatened here. And I've got to draw a line in the sand, and we're drawing it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I so appreciate our VOM staff that do that all the time. And we're also very conscious, though, that the risk for us is less than the risk for our brothers and sisters that we're meeting with. Because, I have a blue passport and I have a ticket home.
Right.
They're still going to be there.
Exactly.
And so it takes a lot of courage for them even to come and meet with us, like you said, to gather together. But so we just had Sister Nada on VOM Radio, and she lived in Iran, grew up in Iran. She actually married the goalkeeper for the national soccer team. So he was very well known. His family was very devout Islamic family, but their marriage was in shambles. It was really heading in the wrong direction, and she was frustrated. And she said she would turn on her vacuum cleaner so that no one would hear her, and she would vacuum and she would yell at Allah. She'd be like, Allah, I've been following you. My marriage is in shambles. You're not helping me. When are you going to show up in this? And just really frustrated with Islam, which is very common in Iran. The government of Iran says, we're running our whole country according to Islam. And you have one of the highest drug addiction rates in the world. You have an economy that's in shambles. And the people of Iran are like, well, if this is what Islam does, this is not working very well. So Nada's in that boat. She's frustrated with Islam. About the time she's running her vacuum and yelling at Allah, one of her relatives who lived in Europe and had come to faith in Christ had a dream. And God said, go back to Iran and share me with your family. And so he got on a plane, flew back to Iran, which is, as a Christian, is a dangerous thing for him to do. Yeah. Nada talked to him, and he led her to faith in Christ.
Oh, wow.
And her heart was changed. So much so, now she didn't want to tell anyone this because her husband's from this devout Islamic family. Like, what are they going to say? This is going to not be good for me. But about 2 or 3 weeks later, her husband looked at her and said, what happened to you? Like, you have totally changed. And she said, he actually said, did you become a Christian or something?
Yeah.
And she said, I didn't want to deny Christ. And so she's like, yeah, I did. I became a Christian. I'm following Jesus. And within a week, he also had come to faith in Christ. They began ministry, underground evangelism, even out on the streets evangelism, very bold. One of the things she talked about in the interview was dealing with the fear, especially as a woman. It is common in Iran, if you're arrested, sexual assault, sexual abuse happens in the police station, in the jail. And so she said there was that fear of what's going to happen. I'm doing something that I know is going to end up with me being arrested, and I know what happens to women who are arrested. But she talked about how God relieved that fear from her. And one of the ways he did that, interestingly, was with a story of a persecuted Christian that she read that actually VOM had been able to publish and print in Farsi. And so she read the story of this persecuted Christian who was courageous, even though they were fearful. And she said that encouraged her. That was one of the ways God took away the fear. And she said over about a 2-year span, the fear was completely gone. And she would just do the ministry. And like I say, they're out on the street, they're talking to people, they're striking up conversations. that's a good way to get arrested in Iran. Earlier this year, they finally had to flee. They finally got to the point where it was kind of closing in, and it's like, okay, we better go.
Yeah.
So they are now, she's in America and still doing ministry back into Iran. You mentioned technology.
Yeah,
They're using technology to still do that ministry. But just an amazing testimony. And I love that we get to share this on VOM Radio because people are, people like you and me, they're driving in their car and they're hearing this testimony from Iran. And then the next time Iran comes on the news, they'll think just what you said. They say, oh, wow, I have family in Iran. I have brothers and sisters that live there.
Well, I mean, when you say that, everybody, we're all mindful of, destroying Iran's nuclear capabilities. And everybody's like, oh, look at this power. And it's great. We don't want them to blow up the whole world. But real power is what you just described.
Right.
We have a message that literally changes the hearts and minds of people. Because then you don't have to worry, oh, what if they build it again? What Jesus has to offer is the greatest power. And that's why when we talked about the kingdom earlier, before you got here, we were talking about when Jesus, or one like the Son of Man, would set up his kingdom and it would crush all other kingdoms. It itself would endure forever. And that's what I think. Well, we're part of the greatest kingdom the world has ever known, Jesus' kingdom, and it has that power to transform hearts and minds. And I'm glad we're a part of it.
Well, and Christianity is, even from the first century forward, the beautiful thing about reading the Bible is you see all of our early fathers in the faith, all the disciples, and then those that they touched, were living this life that you're describing, that you've seen around the world. And what did Christianity do in that first century under this Roman rule and this also Jewish persecution? It thrived. Mm-hmm. It exploded. It went everywhere. And you remember in Acts 8, the minute they killed Stephen, it exploded even further because it kept pushing them out. And so because once it's in your heart, it never changes. And the sister you described, she understands being set free now. And so she wants as many people as possible that she loves to be set free. So I think it forces us to think about this when we look at geopolitical stuff that's going on, that God's working all around. And so that's what I love about your book. So your book is basically your 20 plus years with VOM and the places you've been. And you kept a journal, and you have a lot of that in the book, which I found fascinating when I read it. And it really just tells a lot of stories of a lot of people, right? I mean, that's pretty much
the premise of the book. Often I would go on a trip, I would sit down with persecuted Christians and hear their stories, and I would come back, and in my Wednesday night Bible study or in my Sunday school class, I would say, oh, wow, I just got back from Eritrea, and I met this pastor, and somebody would say in the course of that conversation, man, I sure wish I could go with you on a trip. So that's why I wrote the book. The book is an invitation. Yes, come with me. Yeah. Let's take a trip together. Let's spend 40 days. Every day we're going to sit down with a persecuted Christian. We're going to hear their story. And my promise to you, the reader, is on day 41, your faith will look different than it did when we started the trip. Yeah. Because you can't spend 40 days hearing stories of people who got beaten up, or they had a family member killed, or they were locked in prison, and they still joyfully serve the Lord. Yeah. Mm-hmm. If you spend 40 days hearing a story like that every single day, again, day 41, your faith is going to look different because you think differently, you pray differently. When you open your Bible, you say, wow, this is an amazing privilege. There's brothers and sisters who don't have Bibles. Oh, exactly. And I have multiple Bibles on my phone. So everything looks different after you spend time with our persecuted brothers and sisters. And I'm an American Christian. I've never been persecuted. Nobody's ever put a gun to my head. So I go as a learner. I go and I want to bring you along on that trip. And there are journal entries. I typically journal in the early years. I journaled as a gift to my wife when I would come home from a trip. I would hand her the journal, and that was a way she could experience the trip as well. So those journals came in very handy writing the book. And there's journal entries of great spiritual import and impact. There's journal entries about how much I don't like squatty potties. There's a lot of variety in these journal entries.
Because we all have those stories. So I'm wearing a hat that you gave me today because we love hats here on Not Ashamed, and it says smuggler on here. And I have been a smuggler because I've been on many, many mission trips, and I've taken stuff into countries for people I love that may or may not could get it any other way, including Bibles. Tell about this, if the hack, because you told me about today.
Yeah, so the Bible Smuggler Resources from Voice of the Martyrs, when you buy that hat, when you buy a T-shirt, there's actually a Bible Smuggler Bible you can buy as well. Part of the funding that you've just given for that hat funds a Bible to be smuggled into a hostile area or restricted nation. So when you put on that hat, you are a Bible smuggler because you funded a Bible to be delivered. And Voice of the Martyrs, the last several years, has delivered over 1 million Bibles a year to places where you can't. There is no Walmart. There is no Bible bookstore.
I like this.
So this is a way.
This was clever.
Yeah, this is a way for you to be a Bible smuggler, and every product you buy is funding a Bible to be delivered on the other end of the line.
And can you get to that through VOM's website?
Yes, BibleSmuggler.com is the website. BibleSmuggler.com. All that Bible Smuggler product is there. And, you buy a hat, you buy a T-shirt, that's 2 Bibles. And we don't understand how valuable these Bibles are. Yeah. Like most of us have multiple Bibles on the shelf. We have a Bible.
On your phone.
Yeah, on your phone. I've talked to brothers and sisters who say, I prayed for 10 years that I might be able someday that God would allow me to have my own copy of the Bible. That's a different perspective.
That's exactly
The
right.
reason why your ministry is, I think, is from the Lord and needed is because when you hear these stories, just like when I went to Ukraine, I mean, you can't help but say, man, I'm just pathetic. Because I think
that's not the goal.
Well, I think it's a good thing. You look at yourself and you realize, our biggest problem, I think, in America, from an evil one perspective of temptation, is comfortability. You're comfortable. Mm-hmm. You don't want to get out of your comfort zone. And it's kind of like the separation of church and state. Yeah. It's okay for you to believe, just don't
keep it to yourself.
Yeah, don't make any hay. And that's from the evil one, because our whole mission is to declare Jesus as Lord. That's why we're here. And so I think a little bit of that is needed and good, and it makes you appreciate what we have.
The danger for most of us in sharing the gospel with our neighbor is an awkward conversation.
Yeah,
exactly.
Like worst case scenario is this conversation is going to get a little awkward. My neighbor's going to stop waving to me when they pull out of the driveway. Yeah. Probably they're not going to beat you up. Almost assuredly, they're not going to shoot you.
Yeah.
And we need that inspiration to say, hey, even if they did shoot me, it would be worth it to share the gospel with them. But as an American, that's probably not going to happen.
Yeah, when your worst persecution is a bad social media post, we're not quite there with the rest of the world. Todd, it's so good having you on the podcast, and I appreciate what you do, and we just want to thank you for partnering with us with what we're doing, because so many people are listening to the Unashamed podcast because of our intensity about the Bible. And so, we go together with what you guys are doing.
Well, we appreciate you guys too. And I'd love for more people to get the book, not because I wrote the book, because they get to meet persecuted Christians. And that's really what Voice of the Martyrs is about, is developing that fellowship in the body of Christ.
And getting more smugglers.
And more smugglers. Come on, Unashamed
I'm going to
Nation.
get one of those hats just for a conversation piece and say, I'm a smuggler. And they're like, what do you smuggle? Well, I'm fixing to share Jesus.
There you go. Just like the gospel symbol. Oh, look, Maddie's got you one.
Oh, there we go.
Boy, she got fired up.
All right. Well, we'll see you down the road, Ty. Keep doing what you're doing, brother.
Thank you.
Tell everybody at VOM we said, hey, check them out, Unashamed Nation, Voice of the Martyrs. Thanks for listening to the Unashamed podcast. Help us out by leaving a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. And don't miss an episode by subscribing on YouTube. And be sure to click the little bell and choose all notifications to watch every episode.